Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the webinar. It is actually July 7th, 2016. Like I said before I started recording tonight, this is going to be quite a short webinar. I think it's because there are so many metaphors and lessons and parts of this story that really teach a few basic principles that I think it's an invitation as much as anything to go and read the book. But I think there's some great lessons that both apply to the clients and the students of our program, but also can apply to the parents. This is one of the readings that we've used for almost 20 years now as a recommendation to our clients. It's not mandatory for every client, but most of the groups have several students reading this, several clients reading this while they're with us. I remember years ago seeing a story that Phil Jackson, the Lakers coach, Bulls coach, winning more championships than any other coach in NBA history, used to give this book out to his basketball players. Every road trip that he would go on with his teams, he would give each person a recommendation. This is a very common recommendation that he would give to them. So I'm going to set the story, give you an outline of the story. Then I'm going to talk to you about the principles and ideas that I think are applicable to all of our lives. And then, of course, I'm going to make a final invitation to the things that you can do or the things you can get out of it to read the book that I can't quite do in a webinar. The story is of a young athlete named Dan Millman, who's a young student at UC Berkeley, who's a gymnast. And he's very successful by most people's accounts. He's very bright, he's very, very athletic, but he's haunted by these dreams, and he's haunted by an unsettledness in his life. And so he goes out wandering one night and stumbles across an old gas station late at night where he finds somebody there that he eventually names Socrates. And Socrates is this mystical figure who, throughout the course of the story, becomes his teacher, becomes his mentor, is training him to become a peaceful warrior. And really what he's talking about with that is somebody who is at one with himself, who's at peace with himself, somebody whose participation in life, participation in the world is at peace and in unity with the world. So it's this really Buddhist kind of perspective. And so Socrates becomes his teacher. What leads Dan to this calling, this event, this teacher, is he felt something in his life wasn't quite right. And for a lot of the parents that I work with, oftentimes it's their children that provide that call, that provide that opportunity for them to look at themselves in a deeper way. Sometimes if we're more open and we're more sensitive to the subtle whisperings of life and we can heed those calls without a crisis in our life. But that's rare for many of us, rare for most of us. And not all of us are listening well enough to be able to hear the changes for growth in our lives. And so it takes something like a crisis in our lives, and oftentimes in the case of the parents that I work with, it takes their child getting into trouble, and that might happen more than once. But there's this call on life. Something is unsatisfying to him. Something is not deep enough for him. At the same time, he's constantly resisting the lessons that Socrates has to offer him. He doesn't take well to Socrates' humor. He doesn't take well to Socrates' teasing and critiques. And just like the book, The Knight in Rusty Armor, when the teacher is having fun with the student, is teasing the student, he's really asking the student not to take himself so seriously. And it really becomes a measure about how humble and open the student is to learning. So I think this, for me, brings up the first big lesson that I think we can learn in therapy. Mental health can be measured very simply sometimes by how much we take ourselves seriously and how willing we are to laugh at ourselves. And this is something that's illustrated all throughout this story. And over again, Dan, the young character in this book, comes back with this seriousness, wanting to prove himself, wanting to look good, wanting to impress his teacher, wanting to impress others. And constantly life is turning him upside down. And he has the choice then to be angry and resentful, or to be able to laugh at himself. And of course, as he grows in this process, he's able to laugh at himself more and more and more. So, and what Socrates addresses with him is that he's unteachable, he's arrogant, he knows too much, and that he's full of illusions. One of the main illusions he identifies is that there's this truth out there to be found, to be discovered, instead of this truth that is already inside of him, that he knows deeply, that he can resonate with more and more and more. And I think this speaks to a lot of what I talk about sometimes when we talk about the idea of finding an expert, right? finding an expert in our life, somebody to tell us the way that it is, instead of using guides, using teachers, using even experts to help us to find our own truth and to help us to find out what's in the way of our own truth. And I think that's a lot of the kind of parent coaching, parent teaching, parent education that I do and I think about. That comes from my own experience being a student of a great teacher, being a student of a great therapist, is learning that the lesson that she's trying to help me find are the ones that are hidden inside of myself, that are buried beneath my expectations and illusions. The story is a story of metaphors. There's a lot of metaphors in it. I'm going to highlight a couple of those as we go along. And it's really a journey about becoming a new self. If I can just pause at this moment, if there's anything that I get out of this book that I want to pass on to you, it is the invitation through this book for all of us to become a new person, to become a new version of ourselves, a more evolved version of ourselves. And hopefully we never stop evolving. I've said to some clients recently that the therapist that you should run away from as fast as you can is the therapist who thinks that they don't have any issues, is the therapist who thinks that they have it all figured out, that they have all the answers, that doesn't believe they have their own work. That is the person, that is the guy that you should run away as fast as you can from, because they're not on the journey with you, right? And when you've arrived, you're ended. There's nothing else to learn. And if you can't learn anything else, then you're not open. You're not a student. You're not a wise person. So this metaphorical journey of becoming, of constantly learning, of constantly growing is an important part of it. I'll highlight some of the lessons that I got out of it. He talks about this idea about body knowledge, and he makes this several times, this great illustration of paying attention to our body, being mindful of our body, and learning to listen to it. That it can teach us about our feelings, it can teach us about our issues. There's a really great story throughout this story of whole health, and we talk about that at Evoke all the time, about how sometimes we can carry our stress, our worries, our concerns, our anxieties, our fears in our bodies, and if we can learn to feel our bodies, we can have access to the knowledge, to what's going on for us. So there's a lot about mindfulness. I read a book years ago called Living Your Yoga, and it talks about how yoga is a practice, but really it's not just about the exercise that we go into once or 3 times a week, but it's learning to be mindful all the time. It's learning to pay attention to your body. It's learning to forgive yourself. It's learning to show self-compassion. So he talks about this partially through this journey of what he calls body knowledge. He teaches the principle of being responsible for one's own feelings. And a lot of times, and this is a really, I think, fundamental message of psychology, of parent education, of a lot of the stories we ask our clients to read, is that it's not the thing. It's not your child's struggle that makes you unhappy or anxious, right? It's not the rain during a picnic, like is part of the story in The Way of the Peaceful Warrior, that makes you unhappy. You can react to the rain with joy, with delight, with curiosity. We can have that same kind of responsibility when it comes to our child's struggles. It is our expectations, it is our belief about tragedy that actually causes our suffering. So he teaches, and it's a lesson that most human beings are reluctant to accept, that we're responsible for our own happiness, our own suffering, our own serenity. And I think as parents of children that are struggling, I think we give our serenity, I talk about this, we give our serenity to others, to our children, and we make them responsible for it. And we blame them when we don't have it. And we don't recognize the illusions, the expectations, the beliefs in us that prevent us from finding joy, that prevent us from experiencing life as something that is to be enjoyed, nourished. Even the pain, even the difficulty, even the sadness in our life can be something that ultimately we can find joy in. I had a person teach me years ago that he was grateful for his pain because his pain let him know that he was alive. Recognizing that this is a very temporary thing, this thing we call life. And so it's learning to appreciate even the struggles, even the setbacks, even the difficulties, because they can teach us something. He also talks about that idea that it's more than just experiencing life, but also being able to glean from it the wisdom that it has to offer us. He talks a lot about radical acceptance in this book, and gives several examples where Dan is expecting a certain lesson, expecting a certain activity, and he forgets, because it doesn't go his way, to listen to what life is offering him, what lesson that life is offering him. There's a bullet point down here further where he recognized that there was no ordinary moment in life, that every moment was an opportunity to learn, to appreciate something that was there, that was present, that was offering itself to him. Like I said, taking yourself too seriously. I think where this comes up for me and my clients, if I could say this to the parents that I work with, it is the idea that when you get coached, when you get corrected, when you get taught something, I think many of the parents that I work with are so eager to look good, to be good, to want to show what they already know or how hard they were already trying, that they miss the opportunity to accept the subtleties that are being offered to them and the wisdom that is being offered to them. I know I do that as a student sometimes. I do that as a client. I do that in situations where I want to impress the other person. So when we take ourselves too seriously, we become less of a student. We become less teachable. I already talked about this idea about helping Dan to discover the truth inside of himself. He was contrasting this with his formal college education at Berkeley and the lessons and the facts that he was learning. And Socrates was teaching him there's something more important than all of that. All of that stuff is useful and has a place, but without the wisdom that life inherently has to teach you, all that stuff becomes rather meaningless in his life. He challenges his way of being in the world. It's an abstract idea. It's really my own words. But that's really what my hope, what my own practice is, what my own offering to you all is to be able to say there's a different way of being in the world. There's a different way to regard your child's cutting. There's a different way of regarding your child's failure from school, your child's poor relationship with food. There really are different ways to think about that, to be in relationship to that. And it starts with our own relationship with ourselves, and then it extends to our relationship with others. And sometimes I share that not to say, not for judgment, not to say that I or somebody else knows it better than you, but to help you recognize it's a choice. It's a difficult, well-earned choice, but it's a choice. It's a choice to be suffering in relationship to our loved one's struggles. It really is. And so it's a different way of seeing the world. I was talking to a parent this last week, about this idea that when your child, for example, cuts on themselves, I feel differently about it than you do. If my child was cutting on himself or herself, you would probably feel different about it than I would. When I see your child doing something that for most human beings would be very tragic and very concerning, I become curious. I become interested. Of course I can be triggered into feelings of sadness or despair or great anxiety. But most of the time I become curious. What can that teach us? What's going on? And again, it's not a right way of thinking, because by my own children I'm tripped up and triggered just like you are. But it helps me to understand that it's not the event that's making me feel this way. It's not the thing that's causing it, but my relationship to it, and my relationship to the ideas, to my expectations that causes the suffering. He talks all the way throughout the book about being a student, the virtue of not knowing. You know, even the end of the book and the last part of the book goes quite quickly throughout the rest of his life. And there are setbacks, and there are struggles, and there are mistakes. But the constant process is shedding of the old skin, you know, dying again. Right? In stories, in myths, the motif of dying is almost never a literal part of the story. It is the story of all of us dying. You know, the version of Brad when he was 8 years old, or 18, or 28, or 38, right? All of those versions of me are part of me, are the foundation, are the soil, if you will, in which this current version of Brad is growing. And I suspect that there are things that I believe, things that I relate to, the ways that I see the world, all of those things, that's going to be something someday that also evolves. And so this idea of over and over again killing the old self, letting go of the old ideas. It was like a parent who said to me at one of our intensives, once one of my long-held beliefs was challenged and I recognized that I was willing to give it up, then all of my beliefs were up for grabs. And that is a frightening moment for many of us. There's probably one theme throughout the book, which is mindfulness, and some of you have a mindful practice more than others, but mindfulness is being present, feeling what we feel, tasting the sweetness, tasting the bitterness, feeling the pain, feeling the sadness. Most Western ideas often lend themselves to this assumption that pain and difficulty and distaste are things to be avoided. From a mindful practice, and I think the thing that this book offers is that everything has a lesson, everything has a value, everything can teach us, everything is important. And if we believe that we can trim off the negative or unpleasant or unwanted experiences of life, then we're also going to trim off the joy, because those two are absolutely connected. So mindfulness is a huge theme throughout the book. Like I said, this is going to be a short webinar. The invitation is to read the book. It's a very metaphorical. It's one that many of our, especially if your child has read it, it might be one for you to read to connect with them, but I think it has its own value. Read the book. Understanding our connection or lack of connection to mindfulness and wholeness, and how our lack of wholeness and our lack of mindfulness leads to suffering. I wanted to tell the story of the farmer that I've told before, but that is retold in this book, about a man on a farm and his son, and they have a single plow and a single horse. And one day the horse runs off, and all the neighbors say, "This is horrible, horrible news." And the father says, "Could be good, could be bad, too early to tell. Who's to decide?" And then the horse that runs away comes back with a whole herd of horses, so that the farmer becomes the richest farmer in the whole village. And his friends say, "This is wonderful news." And he says, "Well, could be good, could be bad, too early to tell." And then one day, while training one of the horses, one of the mares, the boy is trampled and his legs become crippled. And the neighbors say, "This is horrible. Could be good, could be bad, too early to tell," the farmer responds. And then there's a great war in the kingdom, and along comes the army to draft them, and of course the boy is crippled, and so he's not called off to war. And all the boys from that village go off to a war and end up getting killed in battle. And so the idea is, we have this attachment. We have this expectation to what is. We have this plan. We have this idea. We have this illusion, is what the book suggests, that we cling to and that makes us feel safe, that's predictable. And we don't know. We don't know even what looks like an absolute dead end, or a crash into a wall, metaphorically, or whatever it is. We don't know what that has to offer us, what wisdom that has to offer us, what gift that has to offer us, what all the struggles from our children have to offer us. And again, when that gets presented to people, sometimes they get so angry with it, right? Because their pain is so real. But the book is offering the idea, the philosophical idea, that anger, that resistance is our own barriers, our own illusions that we're holding on to. And lastly, like I said, this is something that my therapist talks about a lot, is that if you're going to live, you're going to learn to die. You're going to learn to die over and over again. You're going to learn to shed the old skin, to let go of the old ideas, to be open to new ideas, to become a student. And all throughout this book, Dan, the main character, comes to his teacher Socrates and is half embattled with him and half amazed and humbled by him. But he keeps on going back to this place of trying to be done, trying to be completed, trying to be finished, trying to be perfect, trying to be good. All of those things, of course, leading to his frustration with the lessons. So it's a book about transformation. It's a book about changing our sensibility. Do all of the students at Evoke read this book? Not all of them. It's a very common, one of our 5 most recommended books, I would say, at Evoke, but not all students read it. The Man's Search for Meaning is probably the most recommended book. This, along with The Knight in Rusty Armor, probably come in second and third, of course. There's the big book of AA, there's Codependent No More. There's a few books that come in that top tier, and Way of the Peaceful Warrior is one of the more common readings. We like it because it's so metaphorical, and metaphor is a great way to teach people that are resistant. It's a great way to offer them lessons where they can accept it at whatever level they're at. And so in that way, it's a valuable resource for us. And so the more that somebody gets out of it, the more open they are to it. The more closed they are to learning, the more they've arrived, the more resistant and angry and upset they are, the less they're going to get out of it. So that's another reason why it's a powerful assessment tool for us. It's an easy read, by the way. Any other questions? This was actually requested by one of our therapists for me to share with you, to have in the library so that they could give it to parents, so their parents could look at it while the child is reading it in the program and maybe even be invited to read it. Which version of Dan's book are you recommending? Sacred Journey of the Peaceful Warrior, or The Way of the Peaceful Warrior, the book that changes life? Or The Life You Were Born to Live, a guide to finding your purpose? Way of the Peaceful Warrior is the one that I am referring to. A book that changes lives, that version of it. That's the version that I used for this webinar. We also have, I think the other one is called Letters of Socrates. I think that's what it's called, although I might be mixing that up with one of Plato's books. But there are a couple of others that we use. But Way of the Peaceful Warrior, a book that changes lives, is the one that I was referring to tonight, and the one that we use. All right, like I said, it'll be a short webinar. I'll open up to any live questions. I did finalize a couple of dates in Los Angeles and Toronto, so if you're from those areas, stand by. Here are the intensive and workshops coming up. The next two are closed. The Finding You and the Heroic Journey is closed. The next open workshop is in September. There are, excuse me, these are the intensives on the right side. The workshops are here on the left. We like all parents to go to the workshops. The intensives are if you want to do deeper, more personal, more specialized work. Those are the ones that I run. We also would like all parents to attend 6 of these 12-step support groups, any combination of 6 that they want to. We want you to get exposed to them, to the philosophy, see if it becomes a support for you. Northern California is actually tomorrow night. So if you're in Northern California, that's your parent support group. New York City is on the 13th. Chicago is on the 28th. We have set in Los Angeles August 7th. That's a Sunday. We're actually trying a new format because we've been getting lots of RSVPs and very few shows. So we're going to have a potluck on Sunday at 4 o'clock from 4 to 5, and from 5 to 7 a parent support group. That way, if you commit to bringing a dish, then we're going to expect you to be there. And also, there's going to be much less traffic on a Sunday afternoon. Toronto, it will be on Monday the 25th at 5 to 7. Excuse me, 7 to 9. 5 to 7 Mountain Time, but 7 to 9 local time. So Monday the 25th at 7 to 9 local time. If you have questions about it, go to our Facebook page. It was sent out to all our Toronto area families today. You can go to our Facebook page or our Twitter page for more information on any of those. Here are those links if you are on social media. Our Pursuits trips, go to our website if you want to look at family trips or individual young adult trips. The book is available on paperback or also on audio for CD purchase. Go to our Foundation book page, and 10% of your purchase goes to help people who can't afford treatment. All right, I'm happy to answer any question. Our son of 18 left his aftercare after Evoke. He agreed after 48 hours of our tough love and not letting him back home to go back to his aftercare. Our friends of many years, without asking us first, took him in, so he did not have to return to his aftercare. We were stunned, but it seems that this might be a type of story as you have related. Wait and see. Exactly. I was expecting this to be a question, but absolutely wonderful. And if you wait and see, gosh, I'm so happy that you applied that to this story, because this is a painful, frustrating story that most people want to hold on to tightly and expect it to go a certain way, and this feels like your friends are frustrating your efforts and undermining your parenting, all of that, right? But we'll see. Right? We'll see. We'll see maybe something wonderful will come out of this. Maybe he'll learn something. And on and on and on and on. I mean, that's our idea about life, but I'm loving that you applied that to your life. Fantastic job. I don't always see that with parents in these webinars where they take something and quickly apply it. Most of the time I would see them as frustrated with this and saying, how can this be? Same way that Dan reacted to it. How can this be a positive? Why do we need to wait and see? This is obviously against the plan, against what should be. So I'm really, really tickled that you would apply it to your own lesson. Fantastic, wonderful, courageous job. Thank you. I wasn't expecting it as I was reading the question. I have a child spinning out of control and step down. We, along with educational consultant and therapists, are thinking about a short stint back in Willis. Can you tell what that might look like? He's had a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder and he is showing signs of it outside of the RTC container. I think my idea is it looks like completely customized. It can be any length of stay. It can be from a few weeks to a normal length of stay. Part of it when that happens for us is we bring them back and we say, let's co-create this together. What are we trying to accomplish? So the goal would be individualized and tailored, but I'm not always inclined to just say automatically yes. I probably have had the fewest amount of return students of many of our therapists because I wanted to make sure, because Willis is this small, tight box, right? Tons of therapeutic support, emotionally safe, lots of structure. And so if they're struggling outside of the box, I don't know that bringing all the way back down does much. Now, it's a nice recalibration. It's a nice restart. It's a nice safe container in a crisis. It's also a nice reassessment to see what will work. Maybe we need to see something work. All of those possible frameworks for me are valid reasons to have them come back to Willis. But it's not automatic for me. So what are you trying to accomplish? And if you're trying to accomplish a stabilization and reassessment and recalibration so that we might consider what is our next step, what do we want to do from this, I think that that's fine. But don't be surprised if it goes back to this real positive place like it might have had before. And it's not automatic that it will, but oftentimes it does. And if that's the case, have we want to accomplish more than just that, more than just getting back to where he or she was in terms of their success. If there are other questions, other objectives that bringing him back, her back, it's a he, bringing him back can answer, then do it. But if it's just that worked for him, let's get him back so that he's successful again, I would rethink it, of course. But I had several, and I always enjoyed it. I always enjoyed seeing them again. I always enjoyed the work that we did together, and always felt like we accomplished a lot. So it can be a wonderful thing, but it's not automatic for me. It's something where we ask the right questions and answer those questions while the child is back with us. Some of my favorite memories, some of my closest relationships with students that I still maintain to this day, years and years later, were from returning students. So that can be helpful. Maybe come to a family intensive. Maybe come to a parenting intensive. I'm going to plug this, Stephanie, while we're waiting. Bring that question back up in a second, because I'm just going to plug this. If you do that, do this. I'm trying to click out of that. If you do that, do this. Do one of these Finding You intensives coming up. All right? Add that to the equation. Do some really deep work for yourself with this in addition. All right, Stephanie, put the questions back up. My daughter's second trip to Wilderness was more for me than it was for her. A recalibration and a time to breathe for what it's worth, and it was worth it. Yeah, again, if you have a complex, important question about it, I think that's valuable. I just don't want to. I think the only thing I steer away from is there's still work afterward. There's still something to be answered with it, not just it was positive before. Let's get it positive again. I don't think we're doing you a great service if we're only providing that. All right. My next webinar will be Monday. And on Monday, I'm going to be going over two things, actually. These are all requests I'm taking from therapists in our program. So I'm going to be going over two poems. One is called The Perfect Parent. Actually, not a poem. It's a statement that we use in our parenting curriculum. And one called The Perfect High by Shel Silverstein. So I'll be going over those. They don't relate to each other except for they both have the word perfect in them, but I think they're both illustrative and nice lessons. So that'll be Monday, July 11th at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. Have a great week, great weekend, and good news, bad news, too early to tell. So be open to it and be available to the lessons that whatever's happening have to offer you is my wish for you. Take care, folks. Good night.